While my parents were talking to their friends, I was playing with a ball on a pier. All of a sudden, there was a gust of wind, and my ball rolled away into the sea. I sat on the edge of the pier, reached for the toy, and suddenly fell into the water. It was cold and scary. I wanted to scream and call for my parents, but only ended up swallowing water. I couldn't swim and started sinking fast. I had almost lost consciousness when someone grabbed me by the belt and pulled me up. I woke up at home on my bed. A doctor and my parents were standing nearby. They told me that a boy had saved me. My parents had been so scared for me that they hadn't even asked for his name or thanked him. Hi, I'm Linda. After I almost drowned as a kid, I came to dread water. So when my parents gave me a cruise ship tour as a gift, I wasn't very happy. I was in college and wanted to spend the summer holidays differently. Honey, it's time for you to overcome your fear. Besides, Miriam is going too. You'll have a good time together. Our parents were friends. Miriam and I had known each other for a long time, but we rarely talked. She was a confident and gorgeous girl who loved parties and clubbing, while I preferred to spend time in peace and quiet. But in the end, my parents convinced me to go. Soon, Miriam and I were on board a fancy cruise ship. My family was quite wealthy, so such luxury didn't surprise me. We left our bags in our cabin, and my friend dragged me to the biggest bar on the ship. A welcome party was taking place there. Miriam greeted a bunch of guys, and we started hanging out together. Among them was a guy called Theo. Talking to him was very interesting because he turned out to be a travel blogger and a real fan of extreme sports. Even though he was only 18, he'd already been all over the world. Miriam immediately started flirting with him. Later, when we came back to our cabin, she admitted that she really liked Theo. The next day, we gathered by an outdoor pool on the deck. Everyone was swimming and fooling around, but I was just sunbathing. They started asking me why I wasn't getting into the water. I can't swim. Oh, Linda's just afraid of water. She worries that she'll be dragged to the bottom by the monsters. Everyone laughed, and it stung. I got up from the chaise longue and left. It was a sore subject for me. I felt embarrassed because of my phobia and never told anyone what caused it. Theo caught up to me. Are you all right? Did we say something wrong? I'm really afraid of water, and I can't stand it when people laugh at my fear. Theo immediately tried to help me get my mind off things. We walked around the deck and talked. He told me a lot of cool stories, and I listened to him with my mouth wide open. Theo had done just about everything. He'd rafted down a river, climbed mountains, and jumped with a parachute. He used to swim professionally. Then he'd got tired of it and became interested in blogging. Theo's stories really inspired me. Maybe my parents were right. It was time to overcome my biggest fear. I surprised even myself when I asked Theo to teach me how to swim. He was a little surprised, but immediately agreed to help. Just don't tell anyone about it yet. What if it doesn't work out? We met by the indoor pool late in the evening. There was no one there at that time. I knew the pool wasn't very deep, but I still couldn't bring myself to get into the water. How about you just jump off the diving board? Like ripping off the Band-Aid. I'll jump right after you and keep you safe. When I got up on the diving board, I realized that I would never find the courage to jump off it. I was shaking with fear. I wanted to tell Theo that I changed my mind, but he suddenly pushed me in the back. Of course, I lost my balance and fell into the pool. Once I was in the water, I panicked. It was like I was a kid again. I was drowning and there was no one to save me. Then, someone grabbed me by the waist and pulled me up sharply. That just made me feel more like I was a child again, and my panic got worse. I was crying and flailing in the water. Theo barely managed to get a grip on me. He pulled me out of the water and we sat on the side of the pool. I was shaking. I'm sorry. I didn't think it was this bad. He hugged me. I calmed down a bit and we decided that was enough for the day. I went out into the hallway and saw a silhouette flash by. It seemed like someone was following us. But who and why? Or was it just my imagination? When I came back to the cabin, Miriam asked me where I'd been. I had to lie and say that I'd just been walking around the deck. It was raining, which explained my wet hair. The next evening, Theo and I came to the pool again. This time, he was careful. I gradually walked into the water, and he entertained me with various stories. Everything went well, and we started practicing every night. I was getting better and better, and my fear was gradually wearing off. One day, our ship stopped in Barcelona. All the passengers disembarked. At first, we walked around the city with a guide. Then we went shopping, and in the evening, we hung out on a cafe terrace. A music festival was taking place nearby, and we watched the performances of various artists. We wanted to leave, but they wouldn't bring us the bill. Miriam and I went to find someone from the staff when a waiter suddenly bumped into me. He had a tray of drinks in his hands, and they spilled all over me. The waiter immediately began to apologize and even promised our table a discount. I told Miriam that I was going to clean up and went to the bathroom. I wiped off the stains as best as I could and returned to the terrace. However, when I got to our table, there was no one there. What kind of joke was that? Where had everyone gone? Had they left me alone? I asked the waiter, and he confirmed that they'd paid and left. After leaving the cafe, I walked down the street but couldn't see my friends anywhere. I took out my phone and was about to call Miriam, but it turned out that it had died. Damn it! What was I supposed to do now? I was alone in an unfamiliar city, without a signal or a map. I didn't remember the way either. How was I supposed to get back? Tears came to my eyes. I couldn't help but burst out crying. A guy came up to me. Why are you crying? Has something happened to you? By his accent and appearance, I realized that he was local and not a tourist. He probably knew the city well, and I told him that I'd got lost. Pablo promised that he'd bring me to the port, but first he suggested we take a little walk. I didn't really trust strangers, but Pablo seemed very nice and not at all dangerous. We got on his bike and I hugged the guy tight. Pablo said he'd show me the real Barcelona. And you know what? He really did. We rode through the streets, sat in Pablo's favorite bar, and climbed on several roofs. One of them had an amazing view of Barcelona. It took my breath away. Pablo and I had a lot in common. We loved the same music, movies, and even food. Then, Pablo brought me to the La Rival Gardens. It turned out to be so beautiful there. Time seemed to have stopped, and I felt like the heroine of a novel. I wanted to freeze the moment. As promised, at the end of the evening, Pablo brought me to the port. I gave him my number and social media info. He kissed me goodbye, and I got back on board. I felt so good I even forgot about what my friends had done. However, when I saw them in the bar, I immediately got angry. I walked up to them and asked why they left me. I told them that my phone had died and I'd only come back in time by a miracle. Everyone was very surprised, especially Theo. Miriam said you'd go back yourself. That's why we didn't wait for you. I looked at my friend, confused. I guess we just misunderstood each other. And it's not like I knew your phone was dead. She seemed to be acting weird, but I decided to let it go. By the way, Miriam was going even wilder that evening. She tore it up on the dance floor, constantly joked, and even kissed Jack, one of the guys we'd got to know. I was very surprised by it all. When we had a moment alone, I asked her what was going on. You said you liked Theo, and now you're kissing Jack. What does it mean? Miriam waved me away and muttered something unintelligible. I decided to share my worries with her. I told her about Pablo and what a great time we had together. Before going to bed, I'd got a message from him, and we spent all night texting. In the evenings, Theo and I kept going to the pool. I could already float on my own and had almost learned to dive. Soon, our ship arrived in Portugal. We disembarked again and headed to Cape Roca. The guide told us that it was considered the edge of the world. Of course, everyone immediately started taking pictures. After taking a bunch of selfies, I asked Miriam to take a photo of Theo and me. We walked around the city of Sintra and headed back to the ship. In the evening, I texted Pablo as usual, but he didn't even read it. It didn't bother me that much. Maybe he was busy. But the next day, Pablo still hadn't replied. I sent a few more messages and then decided to call. When he didn't answer, I got really worried. What if something bad had happened to him? One day, the passengers of our ship got a chance to go on a boat trip. I ended up on the boat with Miriam and the guys. They gave us life jackets, some instructions, and off we went. Everything was going great, except Miriam was acting a bit annoying. She constantly jumped up from her seat and asked the captain to go faster. He told her that if she kept it up, she'd have to go back on the ship. I didn't understand why Miriam was acting like that. What was she trying to prove? And to whom? At some point, the waves got bigger. Clouds suddenly appeared, and a storm began. The boat lurched more and more often. The captain said that we were heading back. Even though I'd learned how to swim, it was still scary. The waves were getting bigger, and it looked scary. Then, the boat suddenly shook with terrible force. The captain tried to hold onto the wheel but failed, and the boat turned over. It was even worse than when I'd been a kid. A real nightmare. At first, I didn't understand what was going on at all and just flailed. Then, I suddenly surfaced. It was all thanks to the life jacket. Greedily inhaling air, I looked around. Everyone else had surfaced as well. Wait, where was Miriam? That was when I noticed that she was being carried away. She was swimming toward the boat when she suddenly disappeared under a wave. Miriam didn't come back up again. What about her life jacket? Could there have been a tear in it, or had it torn when the boat had turned over? There was no time to think about it. I knew I wouldn't have time to call for help. I quickly took off my jacket and dove after Miriam. At that moment, I forgot about my fear. All I wanted was to save my friend. It was dark under the water. Where are you, Miriam? I suddenly noticed her. She was barely moving as she sank. I swam closer, hugged her, and pulled her up. Then other boats arrived, and people helped us get on board. Miriam was quickly taken care of, and she came to me. While we were going back, she was silent and staring at one point. However, after we got back on the ship, Miriam finally broke down sobbing. We tried to calm her down, but she pushed everyone away and came up to me. Linda, I'm so sorry. You saved my life even after what I did to you. I don't understand. What are you talking about? Miriam said she'd seen Theo and me hugging by the pool. It must have been her silhouette I'd seen in the hallway back then. She got mad at me because she'd liked Theo first. Miriam had been acting so wild to get him to notice her, and she'd kissed Jack to make Theo jealous. In Barcelona, she'd left me behind on purpose, and then she'd done yet another terrible thing. When you asked me to take a photo of you and Theo, I sent it to Pablo. I texted him that you already had a boyfriend. That's why he stopped texting you. Linda, I'm so sorry. She burst into tears again and covered her face with her hands. I didn't even know what to say. Of course, I felt hurt, but my anger at Miriam quickly passed. The most important thing was that she really regretted her actions. I sat down next to her. Theo and I are just friends. We've been meeting in the pool because he was teaching me to swim. I asked for his help almost as soon as we met. Miriam looked at me in surprise. Right, you pulled me out of the water, so that's how you learned to swim. When our boat had turned over, everyone had been so shocked that they hadn't even realized what I'd done. And now everyone started to praise my courage. Miriam calmed down, texted Pablo, and explained everything to him. Then he called me and we made up. In the evening, I came up to Theo and thanked him for teaching me how to swim. You don't know how much it means to me. I've had this phobia since I was a kid. One day, I fell into the water while playing on a pier and almost drowned. A boy saved me. It's a pity I never found out his name. Theo opened his mouth and looked at me with surprise. I didn't understand why he was so stunned. Wow, remember how I told you that I used to swim professionally? One day I decided to practice in the sea before a competition and accidentally saw a girl fall into the water from a pier. I saved her. It was you, Linda. Now I remember you. To say that I was shocked would be to say nothing. I silently looked at the man who'd once saved my life. And that day, I'd saved Miriam's life. Maybe someday Miriam would save someone too, and it would continue that way. I can finally thank you now. Thank you for saving me back then. A few days later, our cruise came to an end, and I went back home. Pablo and I call each other all the time. He's gonna fly to the States to meet me soon. Miriam started dating Theo. When she stopped acting like an idiot, he realized she was a good girl. We're still friends and often hang out together. Theo became my best friend. Speaking of which, do you believe a guy and a girl can be friends? Write in the comments down below.